I want to talk a little bit about brain-dead characters, or at least the concept of a brain-dead character. So before I start, I want to give an outright definition to what makes a brain-dead character. But it's a little bit hard because brain-dead by nature is an insult tacked onto characters or a certain style of play within not only fighting games but across all games. Sort of the most universal example of the brain-dead character within the fighting game community, at least, is the flowchart Ken. A Ken player who has a predefined output for every situation, almost playing as if they were programmed to do so. This player would operate theoretically entirely on reaction, not ever actively thinking, but responding to each situation as if the game were a flowchart. There are obvious downsides to this method, but if played perfectly, it can seem entirely unbeatable. Street Fighter V bots playing Guile have been able to accumulate win streaks of 4 digits through what is essentially perfect flowchart play. It's a great episode of the excellent adventures called Mike versus the Machine, where Mike Ross actually beats this notorious Guile bot on camera, and it's a tremendous, absolutely hysterical episode. I'll post it in the description. That being said, plenty of characters can play Braindead. Those who have the tools to answer every situation can play this way. Oftentimes these characters are some of the best in their respective games. However, ultimately they can be found in almost every title. They're not an uncommon thing. Their presence isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, a Braindead character could just as easily be considered a good character, one who has an option for every situation and an answer for every play. I might argue that the Shotos in general are designed to be this way. Each are lended the same basic toolkit of fireballs and DPs and often Tatsus, although it's kind of unrelated, in order to have some sort of answer for every problem they face. This kind of builds into my point that there is a misconception about brain-dead characters and what makes them. I think you have to play Braindead to make a Braindead character, and I'm going to touch on this more and more, but I kind of want to push that up front before I continue. Now, I don't really believe that there is a Braindead character, but rather characters that have the tools to allow Braindead play, which is to say a reactionary player that relies heavily on their ability to address the situation on screen at all times. So, Flowchart Ken sees you jump, sure you can. Flowchart Ken sees you on the opposite side of the screen, fireball. It's very simple, and if you know exactly what to do, then it should work, and there's no question about that. But oftentimes, knowing what to do is the hard part, and that's why that style of play is hard and makes it, in my opinion, kind of honorable. It's pretty interesting to see a Flowchart Ken do really well in tournament, as they have done in the past. And that isn't obviously secluded to Ken. So, yeah, it's like not a flashy or super interesting way to play. Like you're not gonna, Hungry Box doesn't get as many pop-offs as Mango, or the Flowchart Ken won't get as many pop-offs as, I don't know, I might argue that Daigo's Guile is a little I think not Daigo, but Guile is a flowcharty character more so than Ken, or the turtle character really. So Braindead, of course, can apply to much more than a character. Individual moves or an entire class of character, team compositions, entire games, or the inability to use rollback netcode. A lot of things can be considered brain dead, but oftentimes it just boils down to a lack of knowledge of the game that you're playing. And this isn't to insult any individual player. I think the idea that a move is difficult to address, or in fact, I think this is a really big point, makes you play the game differently, or forces you to address it in a different fashion than you would address a similar move from the rest of the cast. That can be seen as brain dead, but really I think it can be more so seen as either cheap or just exotic. Like, it's not a question of whether or not the move is better than other moves. It's a question of, like, what role does it actually fill? Corey Gaming has a great video on the idea of a flowchart Ken that actually came out this week, or at least the week within me recording this. And another one on the idea of a cheap move. And I think you should absolutely check both of those out. I'll put them in the description. But the reason why I'm actually recording this is to address the point that one of my friends made, specifically between Bardock and Vegito within Dragon Ball FighterZ. My friend thinks that Vegito is less brain dead, or Bardock is more brain dead than Vegito, and his friend believes that it's the reverse, that Vegito is more brain dead than Bardock. And I ultimately think this is just misusing the term brain dead. It just seems like a point of frustration. I think that's kind of clear to anybody in hindsight. That being said, I at least, want to participate in the argument because I don't know, it's interesting to me. And I think Bardock and Vegito have really interesting points of comparison because they're massively different characters. But online, people have, or really across the board, people have problems with both of them, but for completely different reasons. So between the two, like, I don't have a strong opinion about either. Like, yes, I do see more Vegitos online than Bardock's. Maybe that's a point. Or I see more Bardock's in tournament, and that's an easy point to make. But I don't really have a strong opinion on any character, despite, like, my whole Twitter crusade on Hit when the Season 3 match dropped. But that's a totally separate point. I think the biggest point of contention for both of these characters are their auto combos, or their light auto combos on the ground. Both are great moves, but they're equal parts similar and different. Vegito's light auto combo has a 7-frame startup, which is in the slower class of jabs, but has a massive hitbox and plenty of active frames. And the second hit snags the opponents out of the air, and the third is a command grab. But that rarely comes into play, or at least from what I've seen, rarely comes into play. Bardock's light auto combo, absolutely notorious. Tons of memes on this, with, like, just the square button everywhere. Bardock's light auto combo has a 6-frame startup, placing in the faster tier of jabs, but has a second hit, which is far more notorious, and will probably always be notorious for its massive vertical hitbox. Massive's kind of a strong, but it's a very big vertical hitbox, and terrific ability to autocorrect to whatever side the opponent winds up on, because the second hit grabs opponents out of the air and brings them down to the ground for a full combo. It's tremendously consistent. The move feels sticky. Once you're hit, there's absolutely no getting out. You're hit. So the way I see it, Vegito's jab combo is a stronger mix-up tool than Bardock's, but in terms of quality of life, Bardock's jab combo is faster, more consistent, and altogether a better move when you're thinking about what a jab should be. Your absolute fastest move, what you should throw out when you think you can get a hit in, but you're not sure, and tremendously safe. This sort of feeds into my case that Bardock has a lot of tools like this. He was designed as a character who has a diamond-solid toolkit and an option for every occasion. He's not lacking in any category, but could, in my honest opinion, be considered a simple character. And that is absolutely no fault to him or anybody who plays him. There's no teleports, no Cybermen, no beam. Bardock just does what he's meant to, and does what he's meant to do better than most characters in the cast. You can play a flowchart Bardock, though it's a bit harder to do a flowchart in Dragon Ball FighterZ, at least without assists. And I know that's kind of, there's a caveat there where a lot of players will try to force you into a 50-50 mix and just go for a different mix-up. This is a big problem when snap loops were a huge part of the meta. Piccolo was notorious for this. But Bardock, his mix is fairly easy to see, and it's pretty easy to block a solo Bardock, in my opinion. but it's also easy to get beaten out by a solo Bardock if you choose to challenge him. Vegito, though he's not explicitly a worse character, typically ranks below Bardock, and sits usually in people's A tier, whether it be high or low. But it doesn't mean that Vegito is easier to fight against. I'd actually argue that Vegito is a bit more tricky and maybe difficult to fight against, and harder to address, especially online. Vegito is a unique character, and is still unique to the rest of the cast to this day. He has reverse speed, which no other member of the cast has. Reverse speed is when you go from a medium hit to a light hit, or essentially go against the grain of the Gatling combo. He has a beam sword as a key blast in the air and on the ground if you're holding down. He has bouncy normals, which oftentimes disguise them as 6M, which retroactively makes 6M a better tool. And the whole point of his auto combo. It was one of the, if not, I think it might have been the only 5L that was multi-hit. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but it was unique in that. It was weird. And it was hard to fight against. And for most people, I would argue if you're fighting against Vegito for the first time versus if you're fighting against Bardock for the first time, you're going to have a lot more trouble with Vegito. Vegito's probably going to steamroll you. And Vegito can play as a flowchart character, but oftentimes not as well as Bardock can. He's not very consistent. To make up for the fact that most of his normals are really big, have tons of velocity, they come out slow, by extension making them more reactable or just flat out beaten by other faster normals. Something that I really want to touch on towards the end here is that Vegito's 5L has 4 hits. Again, it's unique to him, but it also means that in almost any clash situation, Vegito's 5L will win. However, it only wins when it clashes. And a player who knows this will either react to a clash with potentially a reversal, maybe like Janem's teleport or like Trunks' flip. Better yet, just not challenge Vegito's jab at all unless they know theirs is faster and they can get their jab out at the same time or even before Vegito's jab. And again, Vegito's jab, 7 frame startup, so a lot of jabs are faster than his. Bardock, on the other hand, is difficult to challenge due to his terrific frame data. Again, Bardock is just diamond solid. His toolkit is incredibly tight. It just works. And that's what makes him a top tier character, because he is so consistent. And when you're blocking Bardock, you tend to have fewer options as a result, because he has all of these great tools, versus when you're blocking Vegito. Anytime that a character gives you less options and has access to a plethora of viable options, it's just a top tier character. Across the board, that's what I believe. So the TLDR of the whole ramble is that Bardock is, in my opinion, a better character, but more honest than Vegito, where Vegito is a great character, but more gimmicky. Neither are Braindead, but you can certainly play them that way. Thanks for listening. Check out my Twitch and my Twitter, and I'll catch you in the next one.